Ja, Dicky ist in der Haus. Welcome back. So today we are going to be looking at the Dicker Max. It's one of the vehicles that I picked up in the recent sale, and it's actually surprised me. It's turned out to be a pretty good vehicle. I mean, I thought it would be good, that's why I got it, but its performance has just surprised me a little bit. Like, in some ways it performs amazingly, and in other areas, let's take a look at the vehicle, and let's take a look at the squad. So, for its description, it is from the 521st Tank Destroyer Battalion of the 6th Army. The battalion was formed on August 25th of 1939 in East Prussia as part of the 3rd Army, and it took part in many battles of the Western Campaign, and since autumn of 42, the battalion has been advancing towards Stalingrad. So, what are you getting with this squad? You're getting one tank destroyer, and you're getting a 5-man crew. The tank destroyer itself, the highlight of it is its 105mm K18 cannon coming in at BR3. It holds 26 rounds, and it can move at a maximum speed of 27.84 kilometers an hour, so it is not quick. But it's coming in with 50 mils of frontal protection, 20 on the side and the back, 10 on the bottom, and on the turret face it's 30, 20, 20. It's getting about 180 horsepower at 3200 RPM and weighs 22 tons, so this thing is not zipping around anywhere. But what I can say about it is that its protection has honestly surprised me. I thought being open-topped was very much so going to be to the detriment. But, surprisingly, unlike many of the other open-topped vehicles in Enlisted, it performs very well. So, I think the first issue that open-topped vehicles in Enlisted generally run into is that in some way they expose their crew inside of them, and usually that turns out to be a glaring weakness. So, take the M13 for the Americans, or the Japanese equivalent, I think it's like a Tago, or Tase, or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. It's a 20mm anti-air gun. The problem with both vehicles, especially the Japanese one, is that you are woefully exposed. Anybody with a rifle can pick you off from a distance. Any bomb going off near you kills the whole crew. Molotovs, flamethrowers, they're your worst enemy. Hell, even for a while there, you could just run up and bayonet the side of the vehicle and kill people inside of it. Although I think they've fixed that one. So, going into this, my expectation was for a vehicle that was going to potentially have a devastating gun, but be incredibly prone to losing its crew. And I've been pleasantly surprised. The crew is effectively not exposed whatsoever. I think if you get the sides, especially in the rear quarter, like if you're back onto the tank, or if you're in like the back corners of the tank, I think you can get shots on 2 of the crew members. Just like looking at the x-ray, it looks like part of their heads might be exposed. But generally speaking, I did not have issues being decrewed by things that were in front of me. I would take hits from the sides, and they would kill people, but this doesn't really have a whole lot of armor on the side. That was kind of to be expected. And I could get decrewed if a plane, say, dropped a bomb nearby. But I was genuinely shocked at how well the crew actually managed to stand up in this tank. And I guess that brings us into the next point, the gun itself. So this has a 105mm cannon at BR3, which frankly is incredible. It's the largest gun in the German tech tree currently. And it performs very, very well at dealing with enemy armor. Which, I mean, that was to be expected. I wasn't ever imagining that this was going to have a hard time punching through enemy tanks, but my experience with it so far has been pretty good. I obviously haven't fought everything in the game yet, and like any gun, you can bounce, but as far as dealing with enemy armor, it's very good. As far as dealing with infantry, the HE shell is phenomenal, but I think the battles that I got into just didn't give me an opportunity to fully, I don't know, pull out all the power on the cannon. Like, you can take the 120 on, or the 122 on the IS-2, and you can absolutely just delete hordes of people with it. And you can do similar things with the 88 on the Tiger 1 and 2. And this feels kind of the same as both of those. It's just I never got into a position where I could fire it and try to kill, say, like 3 or 4 squads. Like, most of my experience was shooting at like portions of squads or shooting at individual squads. And in fact, a lot of my shots I was just shooting at like individual soldiers. But I think that's more of a limitation of the matches that I played than a limitation of the gun itself. It seems like when you do hit near people, it just kills them, which is exactly what you want out of your HE. So the biggest limitations then on the Dicker Max have got to be its lack of mobility and its open top nature. So I put the mobility first because, like I already explained, the survivability of the crew actually surprised me. They generally stay alive much more than I expected. But the mobility is not great. 27 kilometers an hour is very slow, and you absolutely feel it. And it does take a bit to, you know, get up and go and all that. It doesn't have a ton of horsepower. And you are hull locked, so it's not like you can just sit there and turn the turret. You have to turn the whole tank, so you kind of have to be on point. There were a few times, though, where I played it pretty aggressively just to see what would happen, and I'm not sure if it was the other team or what, but there were times when I was able to play it incredibly aggressively and just not get punished for it, and then there were other times where I would play it more passively and I would absolutely get punished for it. I think it just depends on the caliber of the enemy team, and I think it comes back to an argument that I've made many times in the past, that tanks in Enlisted, across the board, it does not matter how much armor you have, they're all glass cannons, and you're basically operating on the good graces of the enemy team. Like, so long as the enemy team is not driven to destroy you, and so long as they are not actively pursuing your death, you're going to have a phenomenal time in almost any tank in Enlisted. Even more so if you have either a fast-firing gun or a very large gun, because with either of those two, you can kill lots of enemies very quickly. But if the enemy decides that today you are on their shit list, you can be in the Tiger 2H and you can be hull down somewhere, and if the other team decides that you are going to die and they keep throwing what they have available at you, you're going to die. And I understand there's some nuance, like there are certain weapons that become unavailable or incapable of dealing with you the more armored you are. But at the end of the day, if somebody really wants to kill you, they can pull out a plane and they'll kill you. Period. End of discussion. So, at BR3, I think that this stands at a very interesting position. It, in some ways, reminds me of the KV-1, which sits at the same BR and runs into a similar, I don't know, difficult position. Obviously for different reasons. Like, the KV-1 is hard to balance because it's really hard to kill. This, I think, is equally hard to balance because it has an incredibly powerful gun, but everything else around it limits it. And so as a result, both of them fall into BR3. And BR3 is this catch-all random BR that can play up and it can play down. And if you're going to just let Lady Luck guide you and accept what cards you're handed, sometimes it can be a little bit rough. Most of the time it's pretty fun. I don't think being up-tiered in the Dicker Max is bad enough to make me not want to use the tank. But I understand why some people would not want to play in BR5 matches, and then that opens up like a broader discussion on is like matchmake scumming acceptable behavior. Now, it's not something that I really do. I don't see the point. I think most weapons in this game are good enough that you can play into like BR5 with them, even a lot of the BR1 and 2 weapons. But this is a very potent vehicle if you play it down to BR2. And if you were to leave every BR5 match and only play BR2 matches, I'm not saying that you would feel like a god in this tank, but you certainly have the most powerful gun that anything at BR1, 2, 3 will ever see. And that is a little bit scummy. You definitely have the gun to deal with any tank that the Russians pull out. So in that sense, it does very much so make sense to pair it with something like the KV-1. But even if you look at your armor against similar vehicles at, say, BR2 and 3, like with the chief offender at BR3 for the Germans, right? That everybody, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if they hate to run into it, but the Panzer IV-J, I've seen people complain about it before. The frontal turret armor on the Panzer IV-J is 50 mils, which is the same as your frontal hull, and its turret's 80 mils, which, I mean, it is like a proper tank that's meant to get stuck in, so, you know, it kind of makes sense. But the sides in the rear are 30 and 20, so it has better protection, kind of. Like, the rear's basically the same. The sides are only 10 mils thicker, but any AT weapon in the game effectively can go through that, so it doesn't really matter much there. Really, it's just a difference on the front of the hull, and technically the front of the turret, but the point here is that you have similar armor. You don't have the same armor, like 80 mils on the hull is better, but 50 mils on the turret is the same as this thing's frontal hull, right? So, you have similar armor to, like, a proper tank that's going to get stuck in. You don't have a rotating turret. You have a much, much more powerful gun, though. So, you're sitting in a very, very strong position at BR3. Looking at, say, the Stug, for example. The Stug is probably, the Stug 3G specifically, is probably the closest comparison that you can get as like a premium for the Germans, and the Stug 3F is probably the closest in the tech tree. And if you look at like the Stug 3F in the tech tree, 50 mils of armor, so you've got the same armor as that. Neither of you have machine guns. You have a much bigger gun. It gets 10 mils more side and rear armor. You get 10 mils less, but you've got a much bigger gun. So, looking at the Stug 3G, again, it's the same thing. Like, the Stug 3G is the Stug 3F with a different gun and with side skirts. So, speaking as somebody who doesn't have the Stug 3G, but obviously I have the Stug 3F in the tech tree, and I have the Panzer IV-J, you know, I've got a lot of the German tech tree. Would I recommend getting the Dicker Max? If you see it on sale, and you like playing BR3, I think it is an excellent pickup. Yes, there are times when you're just going to get dicked over. A bomb's going to land near you, and it's not going to blow up your tank, but everybody inside is going to die. Shit happens, but it's not that common. It can happen, though. Like, it is a common enough thing that you should be concerned about bombs being anywhere in your neighborhood. It's not like, say, driving a Tiger II-H, where a bomb can land like 15 feet away because they missed, and you kind of laugh at them. Or even sometimes it can land like 5 feet away and you can still laugh at them. But You know, it can land close enough where it'll kill your crew, but far enough away where it won't kill your tank. Which, you know, to be fair, you can recrew the tank. You know, it's an option that you have. Compared to like higher and lower BR offerings, generally speaking, I prefer to specialize into either high BR or low BR. The thing is, at high BR, the Jagdpanther isn't available anymore. So there isn't really a high-tier German vehicle that I really think is awesome. Like the Airstas M10 is really cool. It's a neat vehicle, but at the end of the day, it's a Panther, and even though I really like Panthers, they don't always give me the kind of performance that I'm looking for, and I think the Dicker Max probably has more character. Like, from a historical standpoint, I think the Airstas M10, especially because of the paint job and what it represents, is really, really cool and a neat collector's piece. But I think the Dicker Max is going to give you a much more unique playstyle, because there's really nothing in the German tech tree that does what it does. There are other tank destroyers, but none of them put a gun that's this powerful on a tank destroyer. Most of them are, to be honest, put in really shitty positions in the tech tree, because they're effectively turretless counterparts. Like, the Panther 470, for example, is sitting at BR5, and the 470A is sitting at like BR4, and the Panzer 4 is sitting at BR4, right? And like these all have guns that are the equivalent of like Panthers and like Panzer 4s. It's like, why would you ever want to use them? You have a better tank that sits at the same BR. Likewise, if you look at the early Stug, like the Stug A, it kind of falls into the same issue, where you do the same thing that the Panzer 4E does, but you don't actually do it better. Like, I guess the Panzer 4E has less armor on the front of the turret, but it also has machine guns and a turret, and I feel like that more than... So, basically what I'm getting at here is that right now, if you want character at high BR, I guess you can go with the Panzerwerfer. It's pretty cool. It can be very effective. If you just want a high BR tank, you've got the Airstas M10. But personally, between the three, I have the Panzerwerfer and I have Panthers in the tech tree. I think I would still go with the Dicker Max just because I think it's cool, and because I think it offers me something kind of like the Panzerwerfer that other things don't. I think it's a little bit less cumbersome to use than the Panzerwerfer. But the Panzerwerfer can bring you a lot of on-demand devastation all at once. But the other thing is, with the Dicker Max, I can potentially play down to BR2, and the Panzerwerfer cannot. If the Panzerwerfer was BR3, that thing would be awesome. But in BR4, playing up to BR5 all the time, sometimes you feel very outgunned in it. Likewise, if we look down to lower BRs, if the Panzer 4E, the premium one, ever comes back around, I would go with that. But given the options that are down there that are always available, I don't really like the Stug A because I have the Panzer 4E. There are some Panzer 3s. There's a Panzer 3N, which is a premium, which is okay. Now that it's got access to some heat shells, it's better than it was before. And there's the Panzer 3M, which is probably what I would go with if I wanted to strictly play low BR and I wanted a tank. That being said, it does slack a little bit against infantry, although it is pretty good against armor. So all of this is to say that if you want a BR3 tank, like if you're comfortable playing a tank at BR3 where you know you're going to go up sometimes, you know you're going to go down other times, I think the Dicker Max is an awesome pickup. It's definitely not the best tank in the game. I still think that goes to the Tiger 2H. Like, BR for BR, Tiger 2H is number one. And even BR for BR, the Panzer 4E is probably better value, and the Jagd Panther is also probably better value, but none of those are available. So for something that is available, especially if it's on sale, it gets my seal of approval. The 105 can be devastating. The lack of a machine gun is kind of expected, but, you know, anything that doesn't have a machine gun is a little bit disappointing. But you're mobile enough, you're tanky enough, and you've got a fantastic gun, so I would recommend it. I think it's a good vehicle. Let me know what you think down below. Are you a tank destroyer enjoyer? If you are a tank destroyer enjoyer, let me know. Do you prefer true tank destroyers like the Dickermax, the Nashorn, that sort of thing? Or do you prefer more of the tanky tank destroyers like the assault guns, like the Stug, the Stu, the Jagd Tiger? Generally speaking, personally, I usually prefer the assault guns. I really like Jagd Tigers. I really like ISU 152s. You know, just these big steel behemoths that just lay destruction in front of them. But the Dickermax has turned out to be a pretty cool vehicle. And I have high hopes that one day in the future we'll get an elephant, you know, Ferdinand. Maybe one day we'll get a Sturmil. I could get behind that. Anyway, as per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.
Einen Kontrollpunkt zu erobern. Der Feind will unseren Kontrollpunkt erobern.